Welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV, the live TV show all about the legal aspects of your business to help educate you on complex legal terms in an easy to understand manner, to help understand why you need to do certain things in your business from a legal point of view, and to help you develop a plan for the future. Our mission at Business Legal Lifecycle is to help empower all small to medium-sized businesses around the world to get access to legal advice so that they can help build their communities and make the world a better place. Did you know that any business owner is on average 7 months away from losing everything? That is the average time it takes from a successful business to fold when an aspect of their business is not set up correctly. Have you ever wanted to get legal advice but didn't understand what was going on? Do you feel like there is a divide between lawyers and their clients? Then this TV show is for you. It is all about empowering you and your business with the knowledge and tools to ensure that this doesn't happen to you. Business Legal Lifecycle TV delivers a twice-weekly show focusing on the legal aspects of your business. At lunchtime on Mondays, we present Fast Fix Monday, a quick 5 to 10 minute show that will give you some actionable steps to consider for the week for your business. And at lunchtime on Wednesdays, we present our in-depth show of between 30 minutes and an hour, where we go through complicated legal aspects of your business in a simple to understand, plain English manner. And whether that is through educational pieces or interviews with experts in their fields. Hi everyone, and welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV. And if you're listening to us on the podcast, welcome as well. My name's Jeremy Stretton, and with me today is Craig Mason.
Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Today we're taking a little bit of a break from our theme of the month, which is Phase 7 expansion, to do what we call our Accountant Partnership Plus program. So we run that through our law firm, Stretton Mason Lawyers, and it's designed to help give our accounting partners an idea about different areas of the law and some advice related to different areas of the law. So this program is something that we run on a quarterly basis. So if you're watching this as one of our accountant partners, then welcome. If you're watching this or listening to this as one of our regular watchers or listeners, welcome as well. So today's topic is becoming a franchisee and what to look out for. So this is actually a topic that has been requested by a lot of the accountants that we've worked with and that we work with to talk about what it is that a franchisee needs to look out for when they're entering into the business. So I'll just flick over. So as I said before, Phase 7 is where we are now, but this topic is to do with Phase 2, which is startup. So we did do a similar bunch of topics on Phase 2 startup earlier in the Business Legal Lifecycle, but we haven't done this specific topic, which is on becoming a franchisee and what to look out for. So today we're going to talk about a number of different things. We're going to talk about what is a franchise. Craig's going to go through that. We're going to talk about the franchising code of conduct, which is very important for franchisees to know about. We're also going to talk about then the advantages, disadvantages, and common mistakes that we see franchisees make. So we're going to go through those in some detail. As always, if you've got questions, please let us put them in the comments on Facebook if you're watching on Facebook. If you're listening to the podcast or you're watching us on YouTube or Periscope, please email us at Lifecycle, Lifecycle @jeremystretton.com. I should probably spell Jeremy Stretton, JeremyStretten.com, and ask us any questions. We're happy to help out and happy to make sure that you and your clients get the best advice going forward for their franchise. Craig, did you want to add anything before we go into the actual talk?
No, I don't think so. I think let's kick on.
All right, well, I'll bring up the first slide. So do you want to kick off with what is a franchise?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so what is franchising? Everyone's probably heard of franchises. They're a reasonably popular way of doing business, and that's essentially exactly what it is. So franchising is a way of operating a business. So you could open your own, burger business, or you could buy a franchise to operate that particular burger business. So that we all know of McDonald's, KFC, those sort of fast food places. A lot of those are franchises. So you could operate by your own and set up, John's Burgers, or you're buying a franchise. And so the difference, obviously, is when you're setting up your own business, you have your own name and do all those sorts of things. But when you are buying a franchise, then the franchisor owns the name, the brands, the system, etc., etc. And as a franchisee, so that's the person that's buying a franchise, they're given the right to use the product, the brand, those sorts of things. So it's normally there's a franchise agreement, so a formal franchise agreement. It doesn't necessarily have to be in writing, and we'll go through that later as to some of the issues when it's not in writing. But so one party, and that's the franchisor, they're granting the other party, which is the franchisee, which is what we're talking about today, the right to carry on the business. They under a specific system that they've got in place with marketing plan, determine those sorts of things, and so there's under the control of the franchisor. Normally, the franchisor will have a trademark, and then and other intellectual property, and that's licensed to the franchisee to be able to operate the business. And of course, with anything, the franchisee is required to pay some money, which is agreed as to how much that's going to be to operate the business. But it's so there's also there's going to be an agreement. There is a franchise code of conduct, which I'll talk about in a moment as well. But essentially, the franchise can be written or it can be verbal, and so you've got to be careful when you're looking at a franchise that all the things are in place. Obviously, you want a franchise agreement because that's going to govern the actual franchise. So that's essentially what is franchising. Jeremy, did you want to add anything there? I think that probably covers it.
No, you've covered everything off there. That's really good. Franchising is a really interesting topic and a great business model, but you've got to be really careful as a franchisee. So I think you've covered off everything there really well.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Alrighty. So if you want to flick over to the next slide.
Done. Yep.
Slide.
Yep.
The next slide is about the franchising code of conduct. So that's a mandatory industry code across Australia that basically regulates franchises. So there has been in the past, some unscrupulous operators. So the government's brought in the franchising code of conduct. It does change regularly. So as a franchisee, you need to be aware of the changes. Obviously, most of them affect the franchisor, but there are a lot of changes in there, and some of them are retrospective. So you need to be aware of the franchising code of conduct and make sure that you're always looking out for changes and those sorts of things as your franchise goes along. It's been in operation since 1998, and as I said, in 2015 there was some changes and some other changes recently that were retrospective about various things. In particular about representations and whether or not they can be relied on. So when you're entering into a franchise, the franchisor may make various representations, and the franchisee would normally sign off to say, well, I've not relied on those representations about profit and those sorts of things. But there was changes recently about the franchising code of conduct that doesn't allow you to necessarily rely on that as a franchisor. So something to be aware of if you're looking at a franchise as a franchisee. With the representations, and if they're asking you to sign off on various things saying that you haven't relied on anything, then just seek some advice about whether or not you should be signing that and whether or not it's going to be valid in the future. But the franchising code includes the disclosure requirements of the franchisor. In there is the good faith obligations of the parties. There's dispute resolution mechanisms within that as well, which become relevant if there's obviously a dispute over something within the franchise. There's cooling off periods with the franchise agreement as well, which is governed under the franchising code of conduct. And of course, with anything in business, there's also procedures for ending an actual franchise agreement. So if it doesn't work out, or for whatever reason, or you're moving from phase 2 in your life cycle of your business, and you've purchased a franchise and you've gone all the way down to phase 13 or phase 12, and you're retiring, then there's a procedure for ending the franchise agreement if it's still going. So the first thing, one of the main things that as a franchise that you'll be getting is the disclosure statement, or the information statement actually first, and that is something that needs to be given. It's not a complete guide to the franchise, but it's basically the starting point for the information. That's why it's called information statement. And it'll explain, what is franchising, why consider franchising. It goes through understanding the franchising relationship, noting that there might be unexpected expenses, not everything's going to be covered under the franchise agreement, and the risks of franchising. Explain that to the franchisee as well. It's a bit of probably a replacement for some advice, and we wouldn't suggest that you just rely on the information statement and go from there. You should be seeking advice. Obviously, this episode for today is sort of towards our accountant partners, and they would know that a lot of their clients would come to them with a franchise agreement, the information statement and the disclosure statement, which I'm going to go through in a moment, that these documents need to be reviewed thoroughly. It's not the time, as I said before, just to rely on representations and, it's all good, it's all governed in the franchise agreement. This is where you need to get some pretty strict advice about what you're entering into, whether it stacks up, those sorts of things, and Jeremy will go through the advantages and disadvantages of the franchise shortly. So that's your information statement. Make sure that's given to you as a franchisee. Have a read of it, as I said, and make sure you talk to your advisors. At that point, your lawyer, accountant, financial planner, whatever it might be, in terms of the finances. But pretty important to go through that. The last document that you will receive is a disclosure statement, and that goes through all the various things about the franchise. It's the purpose of it is to give the franchisee all the information they need to be able to make a decision about the franchise. So again, this is where you're going to be seeking advice, talking to your accountant about it, and it's going to give all the information that's material to actually running the franchise business. So a pretty important document. There is a model disclosure statement that a lot of franchises will follow, and it's going to give the details. Obviously, the franchisor details, the registered office, those sorts of things. The type of business, etc., etc. Pretty self-explanatory information there. They'll have the directors, those sorts of things. Also have the business experience or summary of the relevant business experience for the people mentioned in the franchisor details. Again, have a look at that. You want to see sort of what experience they've got, and if it's a brand new franchise, and it doesn't mean it's not a good one, but it just means you need to probably go through and make sure you get all the advice. It'll have in there details of litigation that might be on foot or previously for franchisees. Again, doesn't mean it's not a good franchise, but make sure you do your due diligence, look into those sorts of things. Any payments to agents, any other supply agreements in there. It'll also have the existing franchisees, which is an important section where it's going to have the details where it gives you an opportunity to talk to them. What else have we got in here? Scrolling through the intellectual property, obviously it'll have in there the trademark details and all the stuff that you're going to be getting if you enter into the franchise. A lot of franchises are, within a site or territory. It's going to explain that, what your territory is, to make sure you're buying the right type of, or the right spot. You don't want to be buying one in Darwin if you're operating in Brisbane, obviously, so make sure you check all those sorts of things. And you also want to make sure that your territory is not going to be too small or whatever it might be in terms of your business, so look at all those sorts of things. There's going to be, sometimes franchisors might supply goods through a channel. It's going to detail all those sorts of things, or the type of goods and services you need to buy from a particular supplier, and it'll outline all the payments that you need to pay within the franchise, which obviously you need to know, because if you're setting it up, you need to know what your finances is going to be, and you don't want to go too far and then find out that it's a lot more expensive than what you thought. So it's going to detail all those sorts of things, so all the payments that you're going to have to pay, the royalties, whatever it might be. They'll also detail the marketing fees that you're going to have to pay. So normally that's paid into a pool, and there's a marketing by the franchisor across all franchisees. There might be specific things to your particular shop in your area as well, but normally it's across Australia or Queensland or whatever territory you're in. And then there's other things about the end of the franchise agreement and disclosure as to what is going to happen there, which will also be in your franchise agreement, but it's all disclosed. There's earnings, financial details, those sorts of things. So the disclosure statement is something that you're going to be getting your advice on. You're going to be talking to your advisors about, and make sure there's nothing in there that's untoward that you weren't aware of, because that's the time to look at all those sorts of things before you go too far into the franchise agreement, sign that, start the training process, all those sorts of things. You want to be able to have got all that information first to make an informed decision about the franchise. So, Jeremy, I think that probably covers the franchising code of conduct and the disclosure and information statement. If you want to add anything there, go for it, or let's go into the advantages.
I'll go through the advantages and disadvantages, and I think there's a few things that I'm going to talk about the common mistakes that people make in a franchise. So I'll cover off, and some part of that is to do with the franchising code of conduct and the disclosure statement. So I'll have a bit of a think about that as we're going. So let's move on to advantages. So the advantages of a franchise. If you're a franchisee, there are a couple of advantages that are really crucial to you starting the business. The first one Craig really just went through is the franchising code of conduct and regulation. So a franchise is a heavily regulated area, and it's had to, as Craig said, they've had to regulate it because there are a lot of unscrupulous franchisors out there, a lot of people who don't understand what they're doing to set up a franchise, and what that's meant is that the law has had to develop to protect franchisees. So that you do have the advantage of the law and the regulation. However, you still need to get the right advice and not just say, oh, well, I'm going to enter this franchise, and if it doesn't work out, I'm going to have the seller or the franchisor taken to court because you've still got an agreement in place. So you need to make sure that it's still fair, but know that it's regulated. So that's one of the main advantages. The second one that should be an advantage is that when you buy a franchise, you're buying an established system. So when you're paying a franchise fee or royalty payments, you're paying someone really for the way that they operate their business to make sure that you're able to continue to operate your business in the same way. So there should be a successful established system that is proven and that will allow you to continue to operate the business. So if you're an employee and you're looking to start a new business, a franchise, the right franchise, and I'll go through some common mistakes in a minute, can be a great way to actually learn some business skills, to actually learn the way to operate a business that you've never done before. So that's the second one, is an established franchise. And also the third one is an established brand and marketing. So a good franchise will have, its brand will be well known, it will be protected by a registered trademark, it will have a really good marketing system in place to help you build your business. So we all know McDonald's. McDonald's is probably the most famous franchise in the world. It's not probably, it is. And it has a great system of marketing its brand, and also it has a very well-known brand. So we can't all buy McDonald's, of course, but if you've got buying a franchise, you want to make sure that you can buy a system that actually is advantageous for you. And that also, the other advantage of a franchise is that it allows people to pool their money together. So in an age where anyone can start a business, and there are so many different brands out there. I did some research on this, and the average person sees somewhere between 4,000 to 10,000 different advertising or brands a day, which is just remarkable when you think about it. If you're watching TV, you're driving along the street, you're walking along the street, there's signs everywhere, and we're seeing everything. And what they've found is that people see a lot of different images. So brand and getting known is really important. And if you're a small business owner, anyone who's an accountant or a small business owner who's watching this or listening to the podcast will know that can be very hard to get your brand known. It can be very hard to get your brand out there. So with the established brand and marketing, often a franchise will have a marketing pool where everyone puts their money together, and that can be used to promote the business. And that can be a great advantage, because that way you can afford TV advertising, you can afford billboards, you can afford much better internet advertising with all the franchises working together to promote their brand. So that's They're the three main advantages of a franchise. So regulation, buying into an established system, and buying into a bigger brand and marketing system that you can actually use to leverage to build your business. Craig, anything you want to add? Anything on the advantages of a franchise?
No, I don't think so. I think, yeah, definitely they're the main three.
Cool. All right, so the next one are the disadvantages. So with anything in life, you're going to have advantages and you're going to have disadvantages. Nothing in life is free. So there are, again, three that I'm going to go through that are the main disadvantages of a franchise. The first one is the wrong franchisor. Now, not everyone is cut out to build a franchise and to be a franchisor. One of the tenets and one of the reasons that we built the the business legal lifecycle was due to the fact that we wanted to show a way of having everything in place for a business before you go into things like franchising or selling your business or just operating your business for the rest of your life. Franchising was one of the key areas that we saw be a massive problem. People often think, I can start a franchise. I've got this great business. But they may not be actually good operators of the business. So you need to look for a proven track record. You need to find the right franchisor who does things like, has a proper system in place. Do they have proper manuals in place? Do they have a system that is working for other people? I'll go through some common mistakes in a minute, but one thing that came to mind when Craig was talking about the franchising code of conduct, and particularly the disclosure statement, is that when you enter into a franchise, if there are other franchisees, you have the right and the ability to ring the other franchisees. Take it, do it, talk to them. Ask them whether the franchisor does what they promise. They're the ones who are on the ground. They're the ones who actually will know whether or not what you're being told is accurate. So take advantage of that fact and get some advice. If the franchisor doesn't have any systems or policies or procedures or an established track record, then they're probably the wrong franchisor. So make sure that you have a look into them. So that's the first disadvantage. The second one is the cost. Buying a franchise is a costly exercise. Usually you're going to have to pay a franchise fee that can really range from $5,000 all the way up to $50,000, $100,000, depending on what you're buying. So you need to make sure that what the costs that you're looking at incurring to buy this franchise are actually worth it. So you need to have a look at the costs. You need to make sure that any royalties that you've got to pay are payable, are financially viable for the business model. And that's where you need to get some really good advice from your accountant. And I'm sure that the accountants who are watching this on the Accountant Partnership Plus program will agree with us on that you need to make sure that you really look at the financials to make sure that it's a viable business. Training, again, often a franchisor will charge for training. Training is crucial, especially if you've never operated a business in this area before. But even if you have, every business is unique. Every business system is unique. So you need to be trained on how that business is to operate. So the first two disadvantages are the wrong franchisor and costs. The third one is a lack of control. So in a franchise, you're basically giving up. Well, not basically, you are giving up a lot of control over your franchise. So a franchise is a system that is established by someone else and that the franchisor dictates what you can and can't do in the franchise as a business from time to time. So that means that they'll have their own operating procedures. So you have to operate your business like that. Often they'll require you to get certain goods and services from certain providers. So you'll have no option on those things. That'll be in your franchise agreement. You have to, there are some rules around that, but generally speaking, they can do that. If you want to expand in the future, that can be a problem because if you're a franchise, you'll have a territory, as Craig said before, and if you want to get bigger and there are other people have territories close by to you, then you'll find that you can't really expand. And also, at the end of the franchise, you'll lose the business if you don't continue with the franchise because you don't own it. The franchisor owns it. So, Craig talked about in the disclosure statement that you talk about, that has to talk about what happens at the end of the franchise. Generally speaking, at the end of a franchise, the franchisor takes back control of the business. They can take back the business itself and sell it to someone else. So you really need to be aware of what you're getting yourself into and make sure that aligns with your goals and what you actually want from your business. Because if you don't, then that's going to cause you huge problems in the rest of your career. You also need to remember this is part of lack of control, is the fact that you're entering into a business relationship with these people. So you need to make sure that you actually understand what it is that they do and where they go and what their system is, and make sure that you actually can operate that business. So they're the three disadvantages that we see mainly. Firstly, the wrong franchisor. Secondly, the costs. And thirdly, the lack of control. Craig, anything that you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a disadvantage, but also a common mistake. But you're sort of entering into a business and you're sort of dipping your toe in, I guess, to see what it's like. Franchise probably not the way necessarily to go, because not only are you setting up a business, you're paying all these things, but you're also entering into an agreement with someone else for a period of time. So you don't want to sort of go into this sort of half-baked. You want to get all the advice, make sure that it stacks up, and don't just think that you can throw a manager in there and it's all there and it just runs along smoothly and there's no issues. You still need to operate it like any other business. So, but you've also got the agreement sort of hanging over your head at the same time if you want it to leave for whatever reason. So, you've got to get the advice. Don't just dip your toe into these sorts of things. Like with anything, you need to sort of go in with the right, with an end in mind, and that what you're doing is operating a business. You're just operating someone else's model. So it can be a disadvantage. Also, I guess it can be a common mistake. So, Jeremy, go into those.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's good advice. I mean, the fact of the matter is that people, they need to understand what they're getting themselves into, and that's why we do these videos. That's why we write books. That's why we write articles, is to make people aware of what they're getting themselves into, so that they can actually avoid some of these problems and hopefully learn from it. So the first common mistake, and I know this sounds obvious, is not reading the documentation that you're given. So you'll be given, as Craig said, the information statement, you'll be given the disclosure document, and you'll also be given the franchise agreement. It will be long. It will be 30, 40, 50 pages long and have lots of clauses in there. You need to read it. You need to read it, you need to get advice on the document, and you need to understand it. That's the second common mistake, not understanding the document. People all too often in life will just sign on the dotted line because they're all excited about what they're getting themselves into and not realize what's in there. You need to read the document and you need to understand it. So reading it, get advice, and ask questions. There are no silly questions, as the old saying goes. There are no silly questions. So make sure that you ask questions of your legal advisor or of the franchisor. The franchisor is under an obligation to answer any questions that you've got truthfully, so make sure that you read and understand the document. I like to give examples, and I can think of numerous examples of franchisees who didn't sign or read documents before they signed, and then they come to us asking for an out. They'll read a document, also they won't read a document, and then they'll have a problem with their franchise. So say that you've got a franchise that that has a certain requirement that paint has to be bought off a certain supplier, and that means that the franchisor will get some sort of benefit for that. Well, that needs to be disclosed in the franchise agreement. If it is, and you haven't read it, and you realize that won't work in your business, then guess what? You're still bound by it. It's not good enough to go to court and say, "Oh, I didn't read the document, Your Honour, and I didn't get advice on it, therefore I shouldn't be bound by it." The general rule is that if you sign something, you've taken to have read it, and everyone's entitled to assume that you have. So read the document. If you don't understand anything, get advice. Make sure that what's in there is standard, but there really is no standard thing in a franchise agreement. So make sure that you understand what your obligations are and make sure they'll actually work for you. Ask lots of questions. When I give franchisees advice, one of the things that scares me the most is when you send them the letter of advice, and then a day later they say, "I want to come in and sign the document." That usually means that they haven't actually read the document or understood. So I'll actually, and they don't like it very much, but I'll often sit there and go through it with them to make sure that they understand all of the really key points and anything that I thought was unfair. So reading, understanding, and asking questions. Please make sure that you do it, or that you get your clients to do it. So the third one is not making sure that it's profitable. And here I'll give you an example of a client that came and saw us who was looking to buy a franchise that was a bookkeeping franchise, a very successful franchise, but they didn't make sure that it was profitable. And I know that sounds remarkable for a bookkeeper, but they didn't. So what they did is they basically came in, we asked lots of questions, we gave the advice, we drafted up a pretty fair agreement. Then they got in there and did their business, and because they're a bookkeeper, and this is a lesson learned from me, I just assumed that they knew what they were doing. The business wasn't profitable. They couldn't make any money because the franchise fees were so high, the prices that were set were so low that they couldn't actually make a decent profit. And basically, they felt that all of their profits were going back to the franchisor. So you can understand there that that's a huge problem. Now, this person, basically was running a business as an employee for the franchisor for about 5 years, didn't make much money, really not even on a wage base. They could have been making a lot of money, all because they didn't go through and make sure that it was profitable. So one of the things I always make sure that franchisees do is go and see an accountant, get some projections. Then when you get the projections, reduce them by 20, 30, 40, 50% and see that it's still profitable. Because when we go into business, and anyone who's started a business or advises people in business will agree, we all go in with rosy eyes. We think it's going to be great. We don't look at the problems. You need to knock it all back down to a good level and make sure that what you're actually going to do will actually pay for the bills. So making sure that it's profitable is very important. I alluded to this one earlier. So the next common mistake is not doing enough due diligence on the franchisor and the franchise. As I said before, one thing that I always encourage my franchisee clients to do is to talk to the other franchisees. Pick up the phone. It's not hard. Call them. Ask them some questions. Tell them who you are. You've got every right to call them and talk to them, but you can ask them, does the franchisor live up to their promises? Go through the promises that you've been made and find out whether or not they were made to them. A good franchisor won't be scared about that because the promises that they make will actually be tried, tested and proven. How hard is it to run the business is another good question to ask a franchisee. People, when they go into business, and we all see this as advisors, they have rose-colored glasses they're wearing, and they think that the business is all going to be great. But is it giving you the lifestyle that you want? Is it giving you the business that you thought you were going to get? Talk to them about it, find out their struggles. Now, remember also that people may not want to give you too much information, so press them. And if there are problems, then what you'll find is they're usually willing and able to give that. So the other thing on that is doing your due diligence on the franchisor themselves. So as Craig said in the disclosure statement, you'll find that you'll get a list of who the franchisor is, what their history is, who they are, who the directors are, and the things behind it. Do some research on who they are, what their history is. Google is a great tool for that these days, isn't it? It's a great way to actually type in someone's name and you can find out information about them. In the first couple of pages of Google will usually have a treasure trove of information about the franchise, the franchisor, how customers see it, how franchisees see it, and whether or not there's been any problems. So take advantage of what the tools that are out there in the world today and find out that information. So do your DD on your franchise and your franchisor. So at this point, I'd just like to say, well, that's the end of the common mistakes. I'll flick off the slides for people who are watching this. But the purpose of today isn't to scare people into entering into a franchise. Hundreds of people enter franchises every week in Australia. It's a very common business model. There's nothing wrong with entering into a franchise, and we're not trying to say don't enter into a franchise. What we're saying is make sure that you get advice and make sure that you look at all these things before you enter into a franchise. Yes, there are common mistakes people make, but if you know about them, then you'll be live to them and hopefully you'll be able to prevent them from occurring to you and to your business. So that's all I wanted to say on common mistakes in franchises. Craig, did you want to finish up?
Yeah, and just flowing from what Jeremy said is, we're not saying that franchises are bad, but it's to be aware of what you're dealing with. And it's like with any business, you need to be aware of what you're about to enter into. So if you're giving advice to your clients about it, they come and see you. It's not, no, don't enter into the franchise, but it's let's go through it and make an informed decision. You don't want to rush into these sorts of things, as Jeremy said, and just go off and sign your franchise agreement because you're locked into various things, and it's not that easy just to drop it and walk away. So, make an informed decision, make sure it stacks up like any decision that you're going to make from a business point of view, and that is going to make a good business. So yeah, as Jeremy said, it's not all bad. It just make sure you're aware of all the sorts of things you need to be complying with. So yeah, that's it for today. So obviously it was about becoming a franchisee, what to look out for. If you've got any questions about the franchising code of conduct, you've got a client that's come in with the documents and want to ask some questions or get some other advice, then please feel free to contact us. Happy to look at it. But yeah, the advantages, disadvantages are there. Make sure that you're talking to your clients about it, that they're not rushing into these sorts of things. Take their time. Franchisors, telling them, quick, you need to sign here, then, think about that, whether or not it's worthwhile. So the whole point of today was to give you some more information about becoming a franchisee when you're talking to your clients, and hopefully they make an informed decision, go into that business, and it's a successful one, and they're well on their way to a successful business and through the business legal life cycle. So, Jeremy, I think that's probably it for today.
Yeah, today is the 29th of November, so this is actually our last show on our November theme of expansion, which is Phase 7. And for anyone who's watching this and a regular to either the show or the podcast, we'll be going into December, which is Phase 3 initial clients. So join us next week for our first show, and we'll be going through to the end of the year. We won't do a Christmas Day Fast Fix Monday, because Christmas is a Monday this year, but we'll be going through and giving you guys some tips and everything, as we do every week on the business and how to set up a successful business. So thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Look forward to you joining us on Monday.